tonight, as part of the Birkbeck series, we're going to be talking about the use of technology and well-being. And I think that in the time that we've just sort of gone through, and that we are in the midst of actually to do with the pandemic, staying at home, working from home, doing school from home, this is quite a topical subject. So I'm going to try and sort of cover the main things that the research is showing on this topic. So, so first of all, it's worth noting that although I think we've all associated technology use and screen time with negative outcomes, there are huge benefits to do with technology. So first of all, access to unlimited information and education, so the opportunity to essentially search for anything you'd want to learn and learn it. Actually, the fact that ICT can really support people who have specific literacy difficulties and help them with bridging that gap. The fact that actually we can use technology to support mental health and to offer treatment, especially for people who are having difficulty accessing such services live or face-to-face. Entertainment, of course, so we've got unlimited access to videos, music, and anything that we sort of would like to know of. But also, it covers a very important and actually basic social need, which is the need to belong and the need to be socially connected. So successful social interactions are actually very rewarding for the human experience, but also there is a wealth of some really big longitudinal studies, which means that it's a study conducted over time, which shows that the most important predictor of happiness is actually good relationships. So having such a tool that can connect us to members of family that are maybe in different countries and people that we would not be able to see or talk to otherwise is a huge advantage. And actually, there's quite an interesting study that showed that social technology use was linked with better health in terms of sort of the physical health, but also the subjective well-being and fewer depressive symptoms in older adults. And what this study found is that this result was mediated by reduced loneliness. So it's that concept of actually there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. So being alone means that physically there's no one else present and you are the only person in your own presence. But it's not necessary that you would feel lonely. You can still perhaps have actions with other people that are not physically present. On the other hand, loneliness, someone could be lonely in the middle of a party or in the middle of a crowded sort of context. So it's about really bridging that gap and facilitating those connections, which is very important and beneficial. And of course, something that we've all experienced with the lockdown, remote working. I mean, I don't know if that's only positive. I think that it will be interesting to see research on sort of the effect of remote working as it's worked now. But there are definite benefits to being able to work and to have that that time at home as well. So smartphones, I mean, they are everywhere, and I was just looking into some of the stats which I thought were really sort of impressive. So so there's well over 3 billion smartphone users in the world today. I think it's approaching the sort of 4 billion number. And interestingly, by the age of 12, over 80% of young people in the UK have their own smartphone. So it really is a new generation of everyone really having a smartphone and that being a given. And there's some interesting stats that came from Screentime, which is an app that helps monitor phone use, which suggests that on average, we spend about 3 hours and 15 minutes on our phones every day. The top 20% of people using smartphones spends more than 4.5 hours. And most people check their phones 58 times a day, most of the time, or actually half of the time, of these 58 times, it's within 3 minutes of a previous time that you checked your phone. So it's that kind of habitual, almost compulsive checking and just even looking at the time and then maybe going into a nap. So obviously, it is something that really is in our lives. Now, what's interesting is that in terms of mobile phone use and smartphone use, as we grow older, the time that we spend on our smartphones tend to decrease. So we see more time spent by adolescents, and that could be linked by some difficulties with impulse control that we quite often see characterizing adolescence as a time period. And there is some research that shows that increased smartphone use has been correlated with consumption of some substances, for example, alcohol and tobacco, especially in teenagers. And again, that does go back to the characteristic of the period, which is more those risk-taking behaviors. There has been some correlation with anxiety, depression to a lesser extent, so not that it's as significant to note, lower mental health, less healthy habits, and some sleep difficulties. But what we'll do is really look at this evidence in a little bit more detail. So in terms of screen time, and this was looking at mostly TV screen time rather than social media use, for example. So there is a systematic review of reviews conducted in 2019, which found that increased TV screen time has a moderate association. So there's a moderate strength of the association with increased obesity, calorie consumption, having an unhealthy diet, depressive symptoms, and low quality of life. Whereas there was quite a weak association, still an association, but it was weak in terms of TV screen time and increased behavior problems, anxiety, inattention, low self-esteem, and low well-being. So it's really trying to look at the evidence and trying to see where we see stronger results, because that will mean that these results are probably more generalizable rather than where we see weak results. However, looking at this research also raises the question of it being a double whammy. So if you've got smartphone use, or if you're watching TV and you've got very high screen time, then that actually links to sedentary lifestyle, which again would be linked with the sort of difficulties that we're seeing here. So obesity, calorie consumption, unhealthy diet, depressive symptoms, etc. So it's actually really thinking about teasing apart what is a pure outcome of the screen time and what might be something associated with the fact that we're spending so long in front of a screen. It's also sort of important to think about how much is too much, because there hasn't been conclusive evidence to say this is the amount of time that we should be spending, for example. That would be an interesting question. Another quite interesting question or interesting topic is whether smartphone use can be classified as an addiction. So whilst it isn't officially classified as an addiction, it does show all of the addictive behaviors that we would see in other forms of drug addiction. So we see habitual behaviors. So it's where you're habitually looking at your smartphone, checking emails, even though it's not necessary that you had an indication that something new has arrived. Mandatory, so where you feel like it's sort of officially required or mandated, and you have to do that checking behavior. Voluntary, but also dependent, so really the importance of the social norms here and how available we need to be all the time, how quickly we need to be responding to messages that come to us, how present we need to feel on social media. Compulsive, again, a very strong urge to continuously perform this behavior, so compulsively checking, for example, how many likes we might have or how many comments as a result of a post that we've made. So at the end of the day, addictive. So a behavior that's defined by the user's progressive exclusion of other activities. So if we're not then going out, we're not doing any exercise, we might be sitting at home on social media and missing out on actual real social time. I very clearly remember a young girl who really eloquently explained to me that you know, if I go to the movies with my friends, then I'll see 4 friends, but if I stay at home, I'm going to talk with 52 friends. So it was that sort of that behavior of really choosing, even consciously, the online socializing rather than the real socializing, which is quite interesting. There is a physiological aspect as well, which indicates that it is in fact addictive. So just a little bit on sort of what happens with addiction in the sense that we all know. So drug addiction, or for example, gambling. So what happens is that some social stimuli become processed by the brain's reward system, which is the system that you can see here, which has to do with the production of dopamine. And so what happens is that social stimuli, so being accepted, having someone smile to us, having a positive relation, actually has the same effect on the brain as non-social stimuli, such as, for example, money, and substance addiction. So all of these things are rewards in terms of how they're processed in the brain. And on the flip side, actually, there's quite an interesting study of an fMRI that shows that the neural correlates in the brain when someone is socially excluded by an online game. So this is not actually being excluded by a physical group, but by an online group. So that was, for example, playing an online game that had to do with throwing a ball. So being excluded from such a group has the same neural correlates as those of physical pain. So it is quite interesting that social stimuli have such an important impact on our brain, and specifically on how we process in the reward system, but also on the flip side, the devastating effects of feeling excluded. So really, what happens is that dopamine is released in the brain, even in the anticipation of a reward. So we release it when there is an actual reward, but also when we're anticipating a reward. And actually, it is very effective, and we produce more, we release more dopamine when we don't know when the reward is going to come exactly. So that time when you're waiting, so you know, if you've posted a picture and you're sort of waiting for the first person who's going to like the picture or make a comment, that is the time when we release dopamine as well. So even that time is very important. And if we think of how all of these apps are designed, so you've got when you're texting someone and you can see the dots appear, which shows that someone is typing and anticipating the response, or when we're loading, when something's loading. I was reading somewhere that actually there's no reason for having a little circle that shows that something's loading, other than it keeps us there, it keeps us waiting for it to load. So really, if we think about how these apps have been designed to help with the increase of the dopamine and really target that dopaminergic reward circuit, we can see how there are some parallels drawn with going to the casino, for example. So if you're in the slot machine, that time when you can see the pictures turning and you're waiting for the outcome is that anticipation time. So it's exactly the same process in terms of what happens in the reward circuits of the brain. So continuing with the social media, so yes, we've seen that actually the apps and the way that they work do have an addictive function, but the social media as an idea and as a tool have many benefits. And actually, if we think of how adolescents use social media, they can use social media quite appropriately and quite helpfully to complete some developmental tasks that are at the focus for them. So for example, it can help with developing autonomy, with developing a sense of belonging. So you can maybe find people who are more like-minded or interested in things that you're interested online, or connect with friends that maybe don't live close to you, and so you wouldn't see easily, but you can still kind of work on that friendship and develop that friendship. As well as explore and sort of develop different ideas. So you can use social media to read about someone else's opinion or listen to someone else's opinion, and then maybe that can help you form your own opinions. But also it's been found to be quite helpful where adolescents have been sharing concerns, for example, about their sexual identity, where it's been difficult for them to use other means to share those concerns. So there are ways that social media can be beneficial and helpful for adolescents. However, we know that social media also come with quite significant risks. So of course, one of the major sort of risks and activities that can really have a negative impact, cyberbullying, which has been associated with negative effects. But also the fact what we're seeing online and what adolescents are seeing online is actually an unrealistic expectation and can lead to upward social comparisons. So seeing other people in the way that they've curated their profile and comparing yourself and coming out negatively and putting yourself down because you're not reaching that sort of expectation. This impact is seen particularly in teenage girls, where we see that actually a correlation with lower self-esteem, increased self-harming behaviors, and more self-objectification, where they're using social media a lot and doing that sort of upward social comparisons. Now, there was a recent study that found that increased TV and social media screen time correlated more with severe depressive symptoms. However, in the systematic review of reviews that we looked at previously, there was only a weak association found between social media screen time and depressive symptoms. So it's really about, again, it's difficult to know when people talk about screen time, whether we're talking about only, for example, TV or any sort of application, or whether we're talking about the phone, and whether we're talking about social media or more passive viewing like Netflix or something like that. Sleep quality is another, and I think we all know quite a little bit about how the use of the phone can have some negative effects on the duration of the sleep, because you might be using the phone in bed, but also the quality of sleep. And then the quality of sleep can be associated with more depressive symptoms or problems at school or difficulties concentrating, which have to do more with the fact that the quality of sleep was such that it's sort of exacerbating these difficulties. So to conclude this kind of body of research, what's interesting is that it's not clear. So there are a lot of mixed things, and some studies finding a moderate effect or a moderate association, and some studies finding a weak one, and some studies not finding an association at all. So actually, there was a large-scale study conducted with data sets in Ireland, UK, and the US in 2019, and what was concluded is that there is a small significant negative association between technology use and well-being, which, when compared with other activities in an adolescent's life, is minuscule. So this is the quote from that piece of research, which essentially says that yes, there is an association, but actually when we look at all of the other things that are happening, we're not sure whether, in terms of the research, that is an important piece of information. And also there was a systematic review conducted by the Scottish government, which again found that further research is needed to really understand any causal relationships. So where the use of social media or screen time or technology is actually causing impaired sleep or poor mental health, or where well-being is sort of lower as a result of it. So the main problems in the research really are the fact that it's cross-sectional studies based on one country, whereas it would be better if we could have data sets from many countries so that we can really understand the actual effects. And that measures usually involve asking participants how long they've been using screens, which again, as people, we're not really good at estimating accurately how long we've used either social media or we've watched television or whatever that is. So what does that mean? I mean, first of all, the internet is a fairly new thing. So we've only had wide access in the past 30 years, and so it's a very new area of research. So the fact that we're having mixed results doesn't necessarily mean that there is no effect. It's not saying that there isn't an effect, but it is saying that potentially what we need is better quality research so that we can really understand what is happening and what the relationships are, so that we can trust the validity and reliability of the results. And the other thing that sort of comes out as a conclusion is that maybe we shouldn't be just blaming social media or technology for example, impaired mental health and well-being in adolescents, but really thinking about the other factors that we need to raise awareness for and target that might be contributing as well. So maybe essentially the question is not so much how much, but actually how do we use social media? So there is a helpful way and an unhelpful way. And we know that, for example, young people that have difficulties in their lives tend to use social media in a less helpful way. But also there are some examples of studies that have found, for example, that the use of Facebook is more harmful when one is trying to actually cope with anxiety. So when it's used as a coping mechanism. But if it's just being used out of boredom or just wanting to look at what's happening, actually the effects are not as harmful. So it is about the intention of how we use the social media as well. So really, I wanted to sort of leave you with some specific things to try and do, because I know that this is a topic that many people are really thinking about, and where actually we don't have clear guidance as to how much is too much and really how we should be using social media and technology. So it's really important to monitor yourself, to be mindful, so really try and break those habitual checking the phone, but actually have a specified time when you want to respond to all of your messages or maybe check what's happened on social media. Take breaks, so if you're finding that actually you're using the phone a lot, you're using technology a lot, really setting timers and trying to have some boundaries in terms of how you use your screen time. Try and postpone and control. So even if you're seeing that you have notifications coming in, trying to not look at those immediately. Do some exercise. So what we talked about in terms of dopamine and the reward system, the same thing happens at the end of an exercise session. So go outside, get active, and get that rush of dopamine as well. Buy an alarm clock. Quite often, this is the excuse of people saying, well, actually, I need to charge my phone in the bedroom because I have it on an alarm clock. So just buy a simple alarm clock. And using things like grayscale so that your phone isn't as colorful. So things that don't catch the eye in terms of how you use the phone. And supporting young people is a whole other aspect, because as we've seen, actually adolescence is the time period when people do use smartphones more. And the gist of it is that actually it's not possible for us to police every single behavior or whatever that young people are doing online, also because they're so much more savvy than us, and there's no way that we can keep up. But it's more about leaving that communication channel open. So it's things like having a conversation from a young age in informal ways. So just getting used to sharing and talking about using the internet and social media. Leading by example, this is really important. So if parents or aunts or uncles are sort of on the phone, it's quite difficult for us to then ask young people to not do that. Maybe having some rules as a family. So for example, not using the phone at dinner times, not using the phone at various family times. Asking your child about the apps and the websites that they use, so showing that interest, learning about them. And then once you're in and once you've got that open channel of communication, if there are any concerns, then you can have a better understanding of why this is concerning or maybe not appropriate, and you can have that open conversation. and setting boundaries, but being realistic. So we know that social media and technology is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So it's more about helping the young person to learn how to use these technologies safely, rather than us trying to kind of impose boundaries that are just not going to be upheld because it's not possible. It's also very important to reassure young people that they can always come to you and talk to you, so that they know that even if they see something that makes them a bit uncomfortable, or they don't really like in terms of the content, that you're not going to overreact, or you're not going to get really stressed, but actually calmly talking about it and thinking about anything that can be done so that this doesn't happen again, but also if anything actually needs to be followed through with whatever has been seen. Talking about personal information and helping young people to learn how to protect their personal information, because we know that once the information is online, it's there forever. And talking about social media specifically, quite often what we see is fake accounts. So young people having a fake account that parents don't know about, even if they friended their parents, or sort of having an account when parents were not aware of that. So just trying to avoid all of the secrecy by opening that channel of communication and talking about it, and talking about what you like about social media and how you use it and how it helps you. And even if you're finding that some posts are having a negative impact on you, and you want to unfollow specific accounts, that's a nice conversation to have with children as well, to say, well, these are the reasons that I'm no longer following these people, but I've chosen to follow other people, for example. And talking about cyberbullying, I think, is really important. So just being clear that it's not okay, and also that there is something that you can do about it if there is an indication that a child might be bullied online. So at the end of the day, I would say, acting on the warning signs, trying to be informed, trying to have that communication channel open, really being interested in what the young people are doing, but trusting your instincts as well as the adult. So I'm going to leave you with some additional resources. I know we've gone through such a huge topic, I feel, very quickly, and there is a lot to look at. But in terms of some support and some tips on how to make the smartphone less grabby of your attention, you can have a look on these resources. And before I kind of go, I just wanted to leave you with the thought of, I know the question that's going to come to me, which is, well, what are young people supposed to do if they're not using technology? They get bored. And I would say, first of all, get them active. We know the benefits of exercise. We know that it's something that gives you a high, that targets your reward system. So really trying to get them away from that sedentary lifestyle. But also allow them to be bored. So it's absolutely fine for someone to be bored, because that is the time when you would get creative, you would get a new idea. You'd be surprised if you leave a young child with nothing to do, they will find something to do. They'll find the shoebox and the brush and make a fantasy land and play. So it's about allowing that discomfort of boredom and teaching children to tolerate that, so then they can move on to the creativity phase as well. So thank you very much. These were the main things that I wanted to share with you, but I do realize that it's a huge topic, and it's more about really trying to strike that balance, as we don't have very specific guidance. Thank you very much.